I'm doing a video to champion the rights, interests and freedoms of women throughout the world, women's rights. If we look at the past 2,000 years, it's only since the time of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a great liberator of women, Jesus Christ of the New Testament. And that's looking at the past 2,000 years. The time before that, the treatment of women has always been an abomination in my view. But Jesus was a great liberator of women. He promoted women, their rights, their views. He gave them freedom, really. And the past 2,000 years, the problem throughout the world has been the cause of 95% of the world's problems are political and government men. Now, if they're going to dominate the world's parliaments and judiciaries, which they do, have done for centuries, they will take the guilt and the blame for all their horrific, violent, evil crimes against women and children. Think about what's the most important political issue in this world. Some may say it's climate change, some may say it's the economy, some may say it's human rights, some may say it's the education system or how we educate people. In my view, the number one political issue in the world is the treatment of women and children. And we look at specific crimes going on, evil, violent crimes going on against women and children throughout the world, not just in Australia. The worst, in my view, are, well, the killing of women and children, the rape of women and children, forced sexual slavery and servitude and prostitution of women and children, pedophilia, which is rife throughout the world, absolutely horrific, and you've got the jailing of women for nothing or minor reasons, and children as well, economic corruption against women and children, and other forms of violence against women and children. Particularly sexual violence is horrifically destructive. And the politicians of the past 2,000 years pretty much are all going to burn in hell, and senior government men. Throughout the world, 95%, parliaments throughout the world, 95% full of men, in Australia as well. So the guilt for all these crimes is political and government men. My view is that men are no longer morally fit to be politicians and work in the senior government. They can cover up a massive amount of crime. They can action crimes against women and children, and they can get away with it, and they can do nothing and say nothing to stop evil, violent crimes against women and children. And that the only reason why they can do that, or the main reason why the male gender does that to women and children throughout the world, is because the parliaments and judiciaries are full of men. It's abuse of power, massive abuse of power. And we're living in a period of judgment, the book of Revelation, that they will burn in hell. My advice to all political men throughout the world is to leave the world's parliaments and also judiciaries as well, because you're no longer fit to be politicians, morally fit to be politicians. That I believe you will be condemned by Jesus Christ of the New Testament. And throughout history, looking at the last 2,000 years, 99% of political men will be going to hell, and all political men will go to hell for their evil crimes against women and children. Some examples I'd like to look at in Australia, which I included in my High Court Writ. I've got a 42-page High Court Writ, which is in the High Court for assessment, with 97 pages supporting documentation. I also filed a similar writ in the WA Supreme Court as well, and that's a 48-page writ of summons, which the registrar puts a block in my way, Simon Dixon, who I understand is a Liberal Party member, the Supreme Court registrar, and I wrote to Mr Dixon and I said that I'm going to continue to pursue getting the writ filed in the Supreme Court, in the WA Supreme Court, because you can't, if the judges and magistrates don't help the citizens of Australia, then they're just as guilty for the crimes going on against the people. One of the themes in my High Court Writ and Supreme Court Writ is government violence against women, political and government violence against women, and I used a whole range of cases. One of them was, hi, I'm just doing a recording. One of them was Bill Shorten, who in 1986 allegedly raped a woman, a 16-year-old girl, at a political meeting, a Labor political meeting, and it's now been reported to the Victorian Police. It's allegedly under investigation, and she would be 44 now. My view is that if Bill Shorten cannot directly say to the public, I did not rape that 16-year-old girl in 1986, then he should be removed from his position. Furthermore, if he did rape her, he should get the death penalty. I believe that so serious and evil and violent are the crimes against women and children, sexual crimes, that we should have the death penalty for rape and pedophilia. And other government men have allegedly raped women and children as well, which I included in my High Court Writ. So with Bill Shorten, for example, it's not good enough that it's being dealt with lawyers, etc., and suppressed by the media or even the courts. If he cannot say to the public, I didn't rape her, he should be removed from the Parliament. And he used rape as a political weapon. He did it in the context of a political meeting. Also, other crimes, there were 2 police officers in New South Wales who, Queensland, Queensland, who raped a woman in custody, and there were 38 witnesses. Absolutely horrific. There's a Victorian appeal judge, Redlich. He granted leave to a Muslim man who raped 2 women, Australian women, and referred to cultural differences that he believed that the man didn't know it was wrong to rape a woman. That's garbage, and as far as I'm concerned, the judge is just as guilty. There's a New South Wales policeman charged with 9 counts of rape and common assault, which I included in my writ. Another Goulburn, New South Wales policeman raped a child under the age of 10. And a WA policeman was charged with 16 child sex pedophilia offences, was released on bail into the community. All of these policemen were released on bail into the community, whereas other rapists would be kept in prison. I included accounts of government violence, police violence against homeless people, the use of batons and things like that. And there was a Aboriginal woman who was 18 months kept in jail without a court hearing allegedly for traffic offences. There's the rape of Kerry Hawkins by a New South Wales police officer, which I did a video about. The case I also included Horvath versus Victoria, Australia, where a young Victorian woman, 21 years of age, was violently bashed by police officers in her home, and several other victims involved were violently bashed. It went to the United Nations. It went to the Victorian Supreme Court, but they really didn't do much. So it went to the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and they gave a damning report against the state of Victoria for this violence and lack of appropriate remedies relief given. So lack of appropriate economic damages provided. Also, I went through, there's a report in the UK that government car clamping of cars is a human rights abuse. I included that in my report. And the violence I've been subject to by the government in Western Australia, and stole my research equipment, deprived me of my liberty, and they locked me up for one night as well. And the economic extortion engaged against me, marking up fines by 560%, which they're doing across the entire state of Western Australia. So it's really stealing off the public and using violence, using the police to raise revenue, and using the sheriff's office is a very violent and a very destructive way for the government to raise revenue. And using the magistrates' court like a bank, where there's no rights for the people, and under the Constitution we have very few rights. So the way they target people's cars as well is very destructive and violent, and and they're using violence to raise revenue. So I included all those issues in my writ. I also want to refer to Tony Abbott appointing himself Minister for Women's Interests. In fact, that's the only position he holds in the Parliament, because the position of Prime Minister is not stated in the Australian Constitution. It's never been written in the Constitution Act of 1900. You won't find it written in there. There is no provision for the appointment of Prime Minister and the office of Prime Minister, the appointment of that position, or how that position is appointed or elected. There's no provision in there for it. And the protectionist politicians in the first decade of Federation, 1900 to 1910, well, they started writing that constitution about 1890, and they assumed the position of Prime Minister. They failed to write it into the Constitution. So that's a massive problem. So in effect, the only position he has is Minister for Women's Interests, and he did it to destroy the rights of women throughout Australia, not to help them. And he's also written references for pedophile priests as well. So I take great offence to that. So he taking that position was to destroy the rights and lives of women in Australia, and also he can take the guilt and blame for all women who've been killed, raped, and violence engaged against them, and children who've been pedophile and sexual violence. He can take the guilt for all of it in Australia, since he appointed himself that position and has never spoken out about it, never had intended to, never will. And so therefore, if he's going to take that position, he can also take the guilt for all evil, violent crimes against women and children in Australia since the day of his appointment, for which he should be jailed, as well as all their economic corruption. I mean, they're out there grandstanding on the global, international scene, and yet they're killing off the Australian-born people and destroying our rights and engaging in human rights abuses against our own born people. So Liberal, Labor politicians, Nationals politicians, Greens, they're all evil and guilty, and you don't get the truth from the corporate media as well, unfortunately. I think a lot of the journalists want to try and print the truth, but speak the truth, but the owners and editors of corporate media are pretty corrupt in my view. So women's rights throughout the world, that 2,000 years of judgment, totally failed, and take the guilt and blame for 95% of the world's problems. The biggest political issue in this world is the treatment, the repression and oppression and of violence against women. And I believe that is the #1 political issue in this world. You look at what Muslim men do throughout the world. Absolutely horrific. The treatment of women is horrific. Satanic, evil, violent men. What they do to women and children is horrific. Look at child prostitution throughout the world. From the research evidence, 10 million children throughout the world get prostituted and die within 4 years by violence, disease or trauma, and it's a perpetual figure. They're replaced. And it's exclusively the fault of the male gender, child prostitution throughout the world, and the sexual slavery and prostitution of women, because the reality is it's men who sell children, men who buy children, men who use them for sexual purposes, and they economically profit off the practice as well, so they're totally guilty. And I don't think crimes like that, evil, violent crimes against women and children, particularly sexual crimes against women and children, will ever be forgiven, unless the victim forgives the perpetrator. But mostly caused by abuse of political, judicial and economic power and social power, political and government men guilty and accountable for all of it, and always will be, unless they all leave the world's parliaments, including in Australia, and other men who support that as well. And I would expect to get the support of 100% of women in Australia and throughout the world, and also probably about 50 to 60% of the men in Australia who would support my work. In fact, I think only the men who support my work will go to heaven, and the other men will probably cover up their evil crimes, either by doing it, or if you say and do nothing, well, you're just as guilty, aren't you? So I would encourage all Australian men and women to support my work and what I'm trying to do, and I think the men who support me, which there are a lot of men who throughout Australia support me, because they believe it's wrong as well. I think they'll go to heaven. And of course the women, 100% of Australian women should vote for me and support my work because of what I'm trying to help women, not just in Australia but throughout the world. Thanks very much.